Right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Joanna Pulgarin from Ellevate. I'm a program manager here at Ellevate, and I am your host for today. Welcome to our very first session of this year's Mobilize Women Week. The session is called Dismantling Social Constructs. It is an amazing topic, really great speakers with us today. We thank you so much for tuning in. This is actually our 5th year hosting Mobilize Women, and we thank you so much for joining us. We do have some really great speakers with us, so I won't take up too much of your time, but I do want to give you a few housekeeping tips first. To start off, please be sure that you're using the chat to engage with each other and with our speakers. Quote the cool things that you hear to amplify that message. Drop some helpful links to life-changing books, websites, apps. Start using it now. Let us know where you're watching from. We are all one big community showing up together today, so let's get connecting. I'm also going to be in the chat along with some other members of the Ellevate team, so if you need to reach one of us directly, just look for us in the list of attendees. We all have Ellevate in our names, and we can help you out. Please also post your questions in the Q&A box for the moderator to see, and click the CC closed captions to toggle on any closed captioning if you need it. And lastly, we are recording the session, and that recording will be posted to the Ellevate website for you to watch again later. Thanks again for tuning in. I'm so excited to watch this talk. Without further ado, please welcome CEO of Ellevate Network, Chris Wallace.
Thanks, Joanna, and thanks to all of you for showing up today, for being a part of these important conversations. I know we're virtual, but I can feel the energy. I hope you can too. The chat is blowing up. This is phenomenal. I encourage you, this is the first session of a week of important conversations. We're creating safe space for the conversations that matter. We're talking about how we're going to show up in the workplace and world, and not just show up, but change it, and change it to make it work for us. So I want to hear from you in the chat. Which sessions are you excited about? Where else will you be this week outside of our opening session? Share it with everyone so we know how to keep these conversations going, where we need to be, and get that excitement going for this week-long event. For those who are new to Ellevate, we are a coalition of ambitious, supportive women and allies who show up for each other and mobilize to change the culture of business. Over the last 20 years, we've perfected the art of creating safe space for women to be honest about work, get validation, perspective, and actionable advice. Thanks so much to the Ellevate team, our corporate sponsors, especially RBC Wealth Management, and to you. Thank you for being here today, for showing up with the intent to listen, with an open mind, and for seeing the true potential of this time, because there is potential. We have had a year of conversations around the impact of the pandemic on working caregivers. But we know that that impact isn't new. That's been happening for all of time. We've had a year of really exploring and doing the hard work around racial reckoning, around the inequalities that exist in our society and in our workplaces and in our world, and the role that each of us have in creating a more equal and equitable future. We've been talking about boundaries and languishing, and how we're all feeling during a time of such great uncertainty. But I want to reframe that for you, because I think the conversation is about where we're going. This is a community that shows up. This is a community that believes in change, and this is a community that is driving that forward. This is our time. The constructs in the society, we're seeing the breaks. We're seeing these foundations that were not built for us starting to fall apart. We're seeing real conversations and real action to change. But that is not a flash in time. It is not a singular conversation. It is something we need to keep doing. We need to keep showing up. We need to keep moving forward. We need to keep learning, and we need to keep taking action. And that's what Mobilize Women's about. During this week and beyond, we will be tapping into safe spaces for real conversations about how you can create action in your family, in your community, in your workplace, and in the world. And collectively, when we mobilize, we see change. We see the world that we seek, that works for us, that works for all people. You are part of something special. You're part of something real and something that is going to change our world. We're starting today with dismantling social constructs. Come back later today where we're going to talk about psychological safety and belonging, but a host of conversations throughout this week. And I have 3 asks for you. 1, listen with intent. I know oftentimes we're in this virtual space, it's easy to kind of half listen, but these conversations are going to be jam-packed of information, of insights, of knowledge and inspiration. So please be present and be a part of them. 2, join as many sessions as you can. We have curated so much in this week, and we want you to get out of this what is most meaningful. If you are a manager, we have a whole manager track. If you are a business leader, we have a leadership track. It's about getting you together with peers that we take what we're learning right now in this moment and really bring it into our workplace and our world. But 3 is to share this with others. I ask you to share because we are all here. We believe in this. We are doing the work and we will continue to do the work, but how do we make this movement bigger? How do we make it more impactful? How do we grow this to really see change faster? To see more allies and advocates who care about these issues that impact us every single day and who are willing to join arms with us to do more and to do better. So please share what you're learning here during Mobilize Women Week. Bring it to your communities so that collectively we can change the world. Now I'm going to turn it over to our panel. Cannot wait for fireside chats for these conversations. Maricella Herrera, who many of you know, is a critical part of the Ellevate team. She's also my co-host on the Ellevate podcast and the VP of Operations and Strategy. She's the mastermind behind so much of Mobilize Women. Her passion really shines through. And so it is such an honor that she's going to kick off Mobilize Women Week as the moderator and interviewer for these 3 fireside chats. She's going to be interviewing Lisa Kenney, the CEO of Reimagine Gender. And wait for that first question because it's a doozy. We also have Leah V, the author, influencer, hijab model, and activist for body positivity, and Jenny Lay-Flurrie, the Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. So I'm going to turn it over to Maricella so we can get this going.
Thanks, Christy, and thanks everyone for joining. I've been wanting to cover this topic at a Mobilize Women event for so long. So I'm extremely excited to be able to talk to Lisa, to Leah B, and to Jenny in individual fireside chats, because as you will see, we have a lot to cover. So starting with Lisa, and diving right into it, I really hope this session can set the stage for the rest of the week. So Lisa, is gender a social construct?
No pressure at all. We're launching the week with the big question. Yes, gender is a social construct. And I think where we get a lot of confusion around this is because we talk about sex and gender interchangeably. So people will say, oh, go back to the biology. But when we talk about biology, we're talking about sex. When we talk about gender, we're looking at things within some sort of spectrum around masculinity and femininity. It's important that we understand the difference between those two things. And the fact that we use them, and this is everywhere. I mean, the number of times, for example, you're asked for gender, for example, and then your options that you're given are male or female. And you're like, okay, if you're going to go through the trouble of asking me for my gender, at least use gender identifiers, which are things like man, woman, non-binary, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that sort of interchangeability, that conflation between sex and gender is a lot of what goes on. But certainly, and I think one thing that can be really helpful is to think about, when you're looking at females across the globe, there's a lot of consistencies. We're talking about biology, we're talking about reproductive capabilities. But when you talk about gender and women, for example, there's tremendous diversity and richness. In many cultures, in the US, we're used to a binary gender system, but throughout all recorded history, we know that there have been societies that have more than two genders. So in fact, many people, when they come into the US or other sort of Western cultures, are surprised, and it's an adjustment to get used to this gender binary. So when you think about the tremendous variation that you see amongst, even the same gender, but across the globe, it's really interesting. I think my first memory where I sort of got this idea was I was in elementary school. I'm 58 now, so I was growing up in the 60s, and all girls in my elementary school early on had to wear dresses. And I remember that dress code changing. First it was 5 days a week, and then it was like 3 days a week. And then finally it changed, and girls and everybody could wear the same kind of thing. And I remember in that moment thinking, well, if it was made up this way and now it's made up that way, well, then it can be made up any way that makes sense. And that was that first idea where I realized, oh, wait a minute, this is not inherent related to sex. This is something that we're all collectively deciding together about what it means for things to be masculine or feminine. So yeah, gender is a social construct.
So as you say, one of the basic or lack of understanding is really the equation of gender and sex. Yeah. And so why is it so important to dismantle this preconceived idea that both of these are the same?
Well, really the most important reason, I think, frankly, is that for most of us, gender is the water we swim in. It's really difficult to even see all of the influences. It's even interesting now, this whole idea of gender reveal, when in fact, we're not revealing somebody's gender, we're revealing their sex. That's what we've learned. And so it begins that early, and then it just continues on. The reason I think it's really essential for us to all understand this difference is until we examine our own gender story, we don't see all the ways in which we've constricted ourselves to fit into these expectations and understandings of what gender is supposed to be. We don't realize that if you have, for example, boy colors and girl colors, but we also gender clothing, we gender professions, we also gender emotions, we gender ideas, we gender how we communicate those things, we gender levels of intimacy, in relational aspects. We are all constricting ourselves in tremendous ways all the time, and the cost of that is enormous. It's a price we're paying, mostly unconsciously, and for really no value. Most things, if you're going to give up something so essential to yourself, you're expecting something magnificent in return. But none of us are getting anything magnificent in return. We're just carving off whole parts of ourselves that are really fundamental to who we are. And that's what we're left with. And we do it largely without a lot of intentionality.
So it's funny that you say the gender reveal, because I've said that if I ever have kids, my gender reveal cake would be a funfetti, because at the end of the day, who knows?
That's right. Yeah.
And I like to think about this idea too, because I remember one of the things that really impacted me when you and I were going back and forth on this panel was your signature. And it's become a normal, I think, for many places and for many people to put their gender pronouns in their signature or on their LinkedIn profile to be very clear about how they want to be addressed. Yeah. And your signature said, "I'm okay with any pronouns."
Right.
And that to me was kind of like so interesting, because it's such a inclusive way of seeing gender. Can you talk a little bit about how your identity or your experience has shaped the work that you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really, it is a gift, I think, when you don't fit into societal expectations and you live in sort of this, your own sort of land in some ways, is I think the great gift, even as a child, was I had a lot of friends who were boys. I had friends that identified as girls. And I remember even as this young kid, and people would say, well, like some of the boys might say, well, girls are like whatever. And I would say, you know what, actually, I know a lot of girls, and that some of them might do that and some don't. Same thing with boys, and living in this world of sort of the in-between. And I identify my own gender. I don't spend a lot of time identifying it, honestly, but I would say mostly it's a non-binary identity, but sometimes it's a non-binary trans identity, et cetera. But I do think a lot about what does this mean for all of us in terms of how we see ourselves, how we're reflected, the social interaction around gender. It's a really interesting thing to me. Things that are sort of surprising. I had breast cancer like a year and a half, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years ago. And before that, I would say I was gendered about 60-40, maybe 65-35 as masculine when I was out and about. I thought once I had mastectomy, that was it, because my breast would be the noticeable thing and 100%. No, maybe it went to 75 or 80% I would be gendered. So more, but what really did it was hair. When my hair fell out, first from chemo, and then as I kept it shorter, 100% of the time. And you think, hair, really? Like that's the thing? And you realize our social constructions of gender come from all different kinds of places. In terms of my pronouns, I just sort of feel like I'm a human.
I love that.
I don't feel particularly, and it's nice because then nobody can misgender me. So I just let them know you can't make a mistake around my pronouns. You're okay. I just sort of, they're all equally fitting and ill-fitting. So anything works.
I love that. I'm a human first and foremost. And how better the world would be if we could all think about that all the time.
Yeah.
We're all humans. Lisa, can you give I know you work a lot with companies and organizations.
Right.
Do you have any examples of companies that are, or other organizations who are doing great things to represent and consider the gender spectrum properly?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I want to say is I think that all companies are very early in this process. So right. I want to create a lot of space for people to be learners. And so I would say, I think that there are some new brands that are coming that are from the very beginning, they're really ungendered. And some of that is in the most historically gendered space that there's been, like makeup, for example. Also, I think children's clothing and toys have been incredibly gendered, and there's a lot of movement there. If you go to the Hasbro site now, for example, there is no gendering. You can't filter by boys' toys and girl toys. You can look at themes. They have age-related things. They do a lot of stuff, and I think that's some of the best stuff I'm seeing. We also have been working with a company called Afterpay, tremendous company, and what they launched in Pride, but it's going to be an ongoing initiative, was so they work with a huge number of retailers, some of which are ungendered sort of brands, but others are traditionally binary gender brands. But what they've done is created a shop where they sort of create a meta level approach to that, where you can just walk in without any filtering and realize that, it has a Pride emphasis for June, but after that it will be, how do we all just simply choose what feels right to us? And we don't start with this thing of, oh, this is, men's clothing or women's clothing. And therefore, we decide that, yes, we can or cannot have it. And instead just look and say, and for some people it might be sort of a bold and daring choice. And for other people it might simply be buying the same article of clothing they already have, but in a color that feels adventurous for them, right? And I think that's an interesting company. And this particular project, I think, is really interesting because it isn't just about gender diversity, right? I mean, I think lots of times, and this is part of the problem that we have today, is when we talk about gender, we tend to talk about it either as a women's issue or like a trans issue. But in fact, we're all affected by constructions of gender, not necessarily in the same way or to the same degree, but we're all affected. And I think that's one of the things that when we realize that that's where we're coming from and that there's opportunities for us all to sort of grow into ourselves. It's never too late, and to figure out those things that fit and then what's ill-fitting. So yeah, I just think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for, I think, a number of companies to let go of some of these sort of outdated, maybe binary notions, and also to look at gender throughout the organization. A lot of time we're siloing it either as an HR issue or a DEI issue. But that's really missing it. Increasingly, more and more of our work is on the commercial end of the enterprise. How are we doing, market research up front or product development? Many companies start from a gender lens at the very beginning of any product development. And how do we say instead, who are we really creating this product or service for? What's the intention? And in fact, are there other characteristics that are more common? I think things like White Claw, where you say, how are they branding? It's a very interesting brand. When you look again historically at the alcoholic beverage industry, it's highly gendered in the most odd ways. But they didn't. They came in and really created or recreated this category on different attributes, right? Like clean water, athleticism, people out have, a mixed gender group out having a good time. I think that's a really interesting approach. I'd say conversely, I was having a conversation with somebody over the Mother's Day, Father's Day thing, and they were looking for a gift card. And there was a company that had their gift cards out, and I was like, it was like a 1950s idea of what a dad is. It was like crazy, literally like the pipe and like a fedora hat and fishing gear. And, it was just this thing out of the 1950s. And I thought, wow, I hope they call, because it would be great to sit down with them and really sort of maybe look at their conceptions of masculinity, give it an update.
We'll send, if we see them, I'll send them to you.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
One last question before we go to Leah V, but I really do want to ask this. This is for the parents. How can we better support and better understand kids so that they grow up without this outdated knowledge of gender?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think honestly, mostly the kids are educating parents for the most part on gender and a lot of other aspects of identity. And that's certainly true. But I think one of the things that's, I think, most valuable is to provide kids with a language and a framework for gender. I think the truth, we assume that kids have it. In fact, we assume that we all have it, and most of us really don't. And learning about it is super helpful. But it is for our kids, because there's a lot of, it's not only this interchangeability of sex and gender, for example, but also gender and sexuality, right? This understanding that, well, maybe if my gender doesn't fit, well, then that means I'm gay, or I'm, lesbian, or whatever, or bisexual or pansexual or whatever. When in fact, gender and sexuality are two different aspects. They're related, but they're different. And so it's important for them to understand it. And I think the other thing I try to do with my own kids, who are now 18 and 22, but just, let them know that it's okay when they don't know, and it's okay if it changes. I mean, the goal of us as humans is that we continue to grow and evolve, right? So it may evolve. We know that right now, for example, from some research, that 23% of Gen Zs expect to change their gender identity at least once in their lifetime.
Wow.
So what the ideas that we grew up with, we need to make sure as parents, we're not putting them in the same sort of lens on our kids, because in fact, the world they're growing up in is different. That doesn't mean, though, that they have all the support they need. So I think the language, the framework, letting them know that you love them and support them, and that you're in this together, bringing up the topic as a learner, asking them to actually help you and have a conversation, because the most important thing is that as they're figuring out who they are, if they're sharing that with you, then you're doing great. If they're not, try to find a way to open up that channel of communication, because it can be really confusing and sometimes scary for kids. So I think that's really the best thing we can do, and then learn from them, because they're certainly expanding the boundaries around gender in a pretty exciting way, I think, that can be wonderful for all of us.
I agree. Thank you so much, Lisa. This has been so much fun, and I am so glad we got started with a very important topic. Lisa will be back for the Q&A session, and we will now turn our conversation to Ms. Leah V, who is looking wonderful with all the colors. I'm also a colorful person, so I'm very excited. Lisa, thanks so much. Leah V, thanks so much for being here today. I am very excited to talk to you, because I think you are an incredible badass.
Thank you.
So
it's very hard.
I absolutely love this. And we were talking before starting this session with the speakers about how it's really stalking what we do. It's mild, but it is stalking. And it's fantastic to me to be getting to know these fabulous women. So Leah, you encourage people to be themselves, to show up authentically, to be confident. And I absolutely love that. But I feel we all need a little bit more of that in our lives, always. So what does confidence mean to you and how do you develop it?
Well, I mean, I get asked that question a lot. And I like to start off by saying that, yes, you can see me in Target. Yes, I've been flown around. Yes, I've been at the top universities to speak, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, when you come from eating disorders, when you come from trying to diminish your Blackness, trying to fit in with the societal expectations of thinness and whiteness and Eurocentric beauty standards, that stays with you forever. And so when we talk about confidence, it is never a road up, right? It's never just up. It's never, I'm just gonna buy this lipstick and I'm just gonna be so confident, right? It's not, I'm gonna lose 50 pounds and be so confident. It is always something that goes up and down. Of course, we want it to go more up than down. So I always tell people, just make sure that you're aware and ready for that journey of what self-confidence, self-acceptance, body autonomy, what that looks like. Many people think when they see my curated, when they stalk my page and see the curatedness, they're like, oh my God, Leah V's so confident all the time. But there's times where I'm on set and I'm just like, I'm usually always the fattest, always the shortest. And so things like that, when you're told that this is the beauty standard, does something to you. So I even have my own issues, right? But some of the things that I do is look at people who are different from me, who are thriving in their skin. Now, whatever that means to you or the viewers, I get power from people who are just thriving in their skin, whether that's like I'm just out with my friend and the sun just hits her in the face perfectly and her melanin is glistening. I was like, oh my God, like that is just, what a beautiful moment. I try to find beautiful moments in small things and in large things too, like Cher and Rihanna and Beyonce. Like I pull from drag queens. I always pull confidence from drag queens. I'm obsessed with them since I was little. And so I pull confidence from not only myself, but the beautiful women and non-binary folks around me. I pull from them, and that's what gives me confidence to keep going.
Love that. And I know you did mention drag queens, and in a post you did recently on Instagram, as I was gently stalking your feed, and considering it is Pride Month, yay.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, you did talk about your journey and how the Muslim community that you are a part of wasn't as accepting of the LGBTQ plus community.
Exactly.
As an inclusive content creator, as someone that puts yourself out there, how do you separate this idea of, your religion with other ideals? Like, can you even separate it? How are we becoming more accepting when there are so many identities that are not siloed?
Sure. And honestly, it's, and I'm disgustingly straight. I don't want to be, but you can't choose it, clearly, because who would want that? And so I have been through just being like a straight Muslim woman who's plus size, who's fat, who's disadvantaged. I didn't fit into the Muslim community, right? There's anti-Blackness, there was fat phobia, there's homophobia, transphobia. And it's not just, I like to preface this by saying it's not just the Muslim community, it's a lot of organized religions and cultures who are homophobic and transphobic. So I like to preface by saying that it's just not Muslims. But speaking from the Muslim community, I got othered. I got othered many, many times. And so to add queerness to it, you're doing the most, right? And so I had to figure out how I wanted to move through this world. Growing up, I grew up very, very Islamic household. The rule was you don't talk to them you don't become them. That's it. Or it's not gonna go good for you. Like, so that's what I was told as a youngin'. As I started getting a little bit older, I started to hear homophobic and transphobic things. I didn't know anything about the community, so I couldn't say yay or nay. Mm-hmm. But then when I started to be more rebellious in my body and in myself, and a little bit during my marriage and then after the divorce, I busted out. And the queer community was here for me 100% when I was othered by my own community. My Muslim community, unfortunately, did not they did not comfort me. They did not support me. They made me feel as if I did not belong. The queer community was like, oh, we know what it feels like to be othered. Baby, come, bring your ass over here. Like, I was like, ooh. And from then I was just like, oh my God, like I've literally been taught a lie my entire life that these individuals aren't human beings. These individuals aren't accepted. Don't be like these individuals. When I want to be like any individual that is open and welcome to anybody who is seeking help, right? Seeking respite, seeking guidance and empowerment. And so when people talk about my queer community, I'm just like, you are not in my presence, honey. And so do I get a lot of backlash for that? Sure. Do I care? Not really. So I just do what I want, basically.
I love that. I mean, you know, like we were talking, Lisa, we're all human.
Exactly.
And humankind, let's be both.
Period.
Human and kind.
That's it. It's simple. That's why I just like don't understand. Like, I was talking to like one of my Muslim friends who is very like, again, like we're allies, advocates, all of that. And we were just sitting in the car, just talking. And I'm just like, why are some people so mad about someone choosing to live their fullest, bestest life in whatever form they see fit? Like, it sounds like you want to be a queer person. It sounds like you want to bust out and be a rebel. Like, but you're so much hate and animosity towards an individual who's living their best life. It's like, I just don't, it sounds like you want to be them. So just go ahead, cross over, live your best life.
Love it. So, you know, going back a little bit to some of the work that you've been doing on beauty standards and particularly the size, unreal, like ideals of beauty and size. And it's something that's been very rooted for forever and also very dangerous and harming for, honestly, for everyone, not just for people who are othered, as you said. How do we dismantle that stigma around size effectively? Where are the sinister places that phobia kind of lurks? And how do we get that to stop?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny because anytime like I post anything about like straight size or thin privilege, and for everyone who doesn't know what straight sizing is, straight size is you can go to any store basically in the world and get clothing. So whatever that means to you, that's straight size. My fat ass cannot go anywhere in the world to get clothing. I am plus size. I am fat. Okay, I'm truly fat. Not that, you know, the nice fat they like to show in these little body positive ads. Okay, beyond the point. So what I always tell people is that straight size individuals need to get on board, because that's mostly where the fat phobia is rooted, in your body privilege, right? So we have color privilege, we have body shape privilege, and then list goes on and on and on, right? Like my shape, because I'm a little bit smaller in the waist, bigger hips, I have more privilege than someone who's apple shaped, right? Or more top heavy. So I understand that privilege and talk about it a lot. For the rest of you, like, that's where it lies. I actually asked this question on my Instagram page. When has your thin or straight size friend stuck up for you? When there's body shaming involved, when there's shopping at a store that doesn't have plus size clothing, when it's a group activity, when a man is ignoring you because you're fat, but talking to your thin friends, when have they showed up? Most of them, if not 99%, said that their thin friends have sat by and ignored fat phobia or just charged to the game. That's where this lies. You must be an advocate for people who are disadvantaged. If you have privilege over somebody, it is your duty as a human being to step up and say, you will not treat my friend like that. You will not speak to her like that. You will not speak to they, them like that. You will not do that. And so that's where it starts. Of course, there's fat on fat crime. I'm not going to lie. In the fat community, there's a lot of body shaming, fat on fat crime happening. Like, oh, that's not flattering. Oh, honey, you shouldn't wear that. Honey, you're fat too. Don't tell me what I should not wear. Calm down. So that's a different situation. But like, honestly, the more privileged people, the people who get better opportunities because of their body, the people who are making more money, the people who are not fired from their job because they're not fat, those individuals need to step up and actually be allies for fat and plus size women. And that's where it starts.
And it's like everything, right? Like, you have to be an ally to others who are not like you or who are disadvantaged. You have privilege wherever you are. Like, there is some sort of privilege that you have, and you just have to acknowledge it and use it. And for people who aren't really aware of this, like, there is significant research that people who are overweight, people who are fat, make less money, are less likely to be promoted, and are less likely to get the job.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's with my coins. So I'm living in this very expensive 1-bedroom apartment in New York City, but best believe there's another straight size blogger influencer who is probably super basic, making 4 or 5 times as much as me, honey. And you see how I do my thing. I'm on it, but I still, no matter how much I'm on it, how much I'm giving 120, somebody who's straight size who's giving 50% is still getting 4 or 5 times as much as me. Make it make sense.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit. You talked about your childhood. You talked about, how your father was not Muslim, and you grew up kind of with this label of otherness from the beginning, either shamed because of your weight or your religion. What would you, if you could go back and tell baby Leah, little young Leah V, something, what would you tell her?
Honestly, like, I don't think baby Leah V would imagine her. I'm sorry.
No.
I don't think that she would imagine her being here right now. Like, I've been through a lot of shit to get here. And just to sit in this apartment and be a part of this, it means so much, because I honestly didn't think I was going to make it a couple times. So definitely tell her to keep going, to surround herself with people who care, people who aren't going to tear her down because of her Islam or tear her down because of her wild dreams of being on someone's advertisement, and to keep pushing no matter what anyone says. Like, I don't think that people understand, like, they see where I'm at now and they forget where I came from. I had no father, poor, single mother with multiple children. And so for a fat Black Muslim to be here is very rare. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I am unfortunately one of a kind, and I wanna empower people who have been othered and who have basically been told that they can never do anything in this life, to know that it's possible. And so I'll definitely tell baby Leah V to keep it pushing, and just know that there's something much better on the other side, but you have to find it, and that's the journey. It's just looking for it and doing it. So yeah.
Leah V, if you see, and baby Leah V, I wish you could see our chat right now, because it is blowing up with people saying you are loved. You are sent virtual hugs. You are beautiful and inspiring and strong. And I
thank you so much.
Wholeheartedly agree. So I hope Leah V and baby Leah V know that.
Thank you.
If you could tell all of these wonderful people who are here with us, what would your advice be to them in order to live their best life? Like, really?
I mean, I think the advice I would give is to basically, you have to honestly find your inner badass bitch. Because I always give all the credit to everybody else and credit to my creator in the universe. But at the same time, it's just like, I've always had that spark in me, no matter how many times someone tried to like beat me down. I can remember at certain points, and I was just young, was just like, you literally got this. There's something inside of me. Sometimes it was a dull thought. Sometimes it was more stronger. There's something inside of me that was like, girl, like literally, like if you just keep going like another day, I swear, like it's gonna pay off. And that hope I hung on to, even if it was a dull hope that things would get better for me, that the pain that I was in, the trauma that I was in, the bad marriage that I was in, the frenemy group who's to fat shame me on the low and also on the high, that wasn't what life was all about. And so like I had to continuously listen to myself. And also like the universe, I believe in the universe, a lot of energies. And I feel like the universe sends you people, situations when you least expect it. Like I remember being so low and like a stranger on the street being like, I don't know like why I'm talking to you right now, but like I'm getting something off of you, like this amazing energy and light. Like I don't know what you do, but keep going. And I'd be like, oh my God, like what? Like I was trying to quit this. This is tiring. Like being a business person, an entrepreneur, a brand, just living authentically is tiring as fuck. And so just having those little moments where you are valid, you are wanted, you are worthy, it pushes you to do more and do better for yourself. So like I would definitely tell people, like listen to that, listen to what's in here, whether it's dull or there's loud, like listen to it and go for it.
I love that. Listen to what's in here. And I will say, you do have a light and a spark to you, Leah.
Thank you.
And I love it. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with Leah V also in the Q&A in a few minutes. So please send in your questions through the Q&A. I know the chat is blowing up. So it's great to see how everyone is engaged. And now for our last conversation in the session today, before we go into the Q&A, would love to welcome Jenny Lay-Flurrie. Jenny, I'm so excited to talk to you. I'm gonna give out a Mobilize Women secret here, but you've been on my speaker wish list for the past at least 3 years.
No, so hi there, folks. I think we should just end now, right? Leah just like threw a mic down and girlfriend, we should just end this now. Let's just be done and go drink a cup of tea. Yeah, that was phenomenal.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation too, because I think when we think about ability, different ability or disability, however you want to mentally talk about it, it's very different what people think and what the reality is. I wanted to start off with a little bit of your background. So you had severe hearing loss, but hid it. And then years later, Jerry came, who is a blood clot that you named. How did the idea of having a more visible issue change your perspective and your relationship with accessibility, if at all?
Well, first, let's get really clear on the words, right? Because I think those words matter. I have a disability. In fact, I have a few because I'm getting older and that's how the world works. Disability is just being a part of human. I was supposedly born with normal hearing. My sister was born with hearing loss. My dad had hearing loss. I got measles, so I'm very pro-vaccination. And the measles cause massive hearing issues. Okay. And so my hearing has systematically declined over the 40-ish years. I'm not going to declare my age, that would be rude. And what it means now is that I'm severely, profoundly deaf and I cannot hear you, but I sound great. What you may not realize is that I sound British, but I'm actually near a place called Birmingham. So, and I love where I'm from, but I'm glad I don't have the accent, and that's the joy of being deaf. But I learned very much to hide it. And I learned it not necessarily, you know, I'd tell people I had hearing problems, but I wouldn't tell them that I couldn't hear them. And And part of that was just learned behavior. I went to music school, and it wasn't cool to have a deaf musician in a music school. And so it was just learned behavior. It's just easier. And bluntly, every time I walk into a shop right now, and yesterday I was out and about, and people are wearing masks, and I then have to reveal my personal journey to an absolute bloody stranger. And no, it's just, you have to choose and pick where you want to send it and where you want to share that. But the language, disability, I'm not differently abled, I'm not special needs, I'm not diversely abled or any of that abled stuff. I have a disability, I'm deaf. I'm proud of that. It's part of who I am. I think the learning I had when Jerry came along, which was a 2-foot blood clot, just a genetic, another gorgeous abnormality that just, again, part of my human that popped up as I was getting on a plane to an accessibility conference, which is the irony. What I learned through that is, I came very quickly up to speed with what it meant to possibly lose your life, because that was a very real thing. It busted my leg pretty good. The doctors were able to get rid of most of Jerry, but it left my leg in a bit of a tragic state. And so I had a physical, visible disability. I've had deafness and I've had an eating disorder my whole life, but I've never had a physical disability. And man, people treated me weird. They would, they'd want to know every excruciating detail about my leg and my cane, and I would, depending on the day, I would tell them what it was and I'd educate, and if I was in that mind space I could do it. Other days I would just honestly be just slightly snarky, and some people were informed that there'd been a shark attack, others I'd been attacked by a raccoon. But mostly, again, I'd be educating people, and people with disabilities are so often put in this position. I'd be like, please don't open that door for me. I'm actually going to balance on it. And it's part of my physical therapy to get through this door unaided. Don't open it. In fact, and then, no, I got it. Open the door, smack. I go right the way on the ground. So it's a constant education, I think, with disability. But I've learned a lot. I think I'll continue to learn because disabilities grow.
I really appreciate you tackling the language first and foremost. I know that it is something that the people talk about, and I really, really appreciate that you were very clear. I'm a person with a disability, and that's the way we talk about it. Do you think there's a disconnect between how society see people with disability and how people with disabilities might see themselves? Like, is this kind of a social construct in a way?
Oh, totally. People see, the first reaction when people would see me with my cane, or they're like, I say, I'm sorry, in the store yesterday, I'm sorry, I really can't hear you because of the masks. Would you mind stepping back or writing it down? Oh, I'm so sorry. What are you sorry for? I've just got a disability. I'm human. I'm quite sassy. And nothing's going to change that. My ears don't work. It's not the end of the world. Get over it. And people come to us with this sickly amount of sympathy. Stop that. Stop it right now. People think when you have a disability, you are less than. And the number of times that this happens, I can't even tell you. I've had so many instances, and my husband often helps me in these instances of interpreting. Well, can you tell her? No. Talk to me when my interpreter's with me. Is she okay too? There is nothing worse than the sickliness that comes with disability. Here's the reality. I've got a music degree. I've got an MBA. I've spent now 20 years working in the tech industry, and I'm Chief Accessibility Officer at Microsoft. I'm okay. There ain't nothing that needs sympathy about. The only thing you need to do is stop being ableist. And what I mean by that is, don't come to me with I can't communicate with you because you're deaf, or don't come to me with this, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Remove your blockers. and everyone has blockers that they create. That is a social construct. We are not inclusive of disability.
Absolutely. And I had a question here for you, because it also comes from when we're kids, right? Like if a child sees someone with a prosthetic leg or some other visible disability, they will ask their parents like about it. But parents very likely could or would get embarrassed about the curiosity, tell them to like be quiet, not say anything. And so we learn from a very young age to kind of go back and not kind of shame from our curiosity or from talking about things that are the way they are. How do we break that construct, celebrate differences? How do we start talking to our kids about disabilities and about people being different?
You just got to say the word. I mean, you know, when we see a kid with a disability, if it's appropriate, we say hi, as you would to any other kid, as you would to any other person. You say hi. You don't be awkward. And if you're in doubt, ask. I will say I got a 13-year-old who's hopefully in school right now. It's last day of school. She keeps telling me there's no point, Mom, but she better be in school. And she's autistic. And I brought her up to be totally honest and open and proud about that. And she said to me at dinner the other night, you know, the reality, Mom, is that they just don't have an autistic kid. They don't get it. And I'm autistic and awesome, is what she often says to people. The more that we can just accept disability as a part of being human, the quicker and easier it will be. So yeah, if you're out and about and you see a person with a disability, treat them as you would someone else. If you're curious about what language to use, get educated, right? It's person with disability, disabled persons, both are equally applicable. Everyone will use their own language. Don't use horrible words. And by horrible words, I mean mute to describe a deaf person. No one's ever mute. Doesn't matter if they use their hands as their first language. They ain't mute. There's so many awful cripples, I mean, there's just awful. Don't use any of those. Just say, hey, how you doing? Do you mind me asking a question? And if they say actually no, it could be that they're in going to be bitten by a raccoon moment. Step away, say totally got it. Or you may enter into a conversation. Don't ask them about their disability though. Please don't ask them how did they get their disability. You wouldn't share that with a stranger. It's personal, it's medical, it's not your business. But treat them as you would anyone else.
You do lots of work at Microsoft, both internally for accessibility within the organization, but also externally for like product design and how you make things more accessible. How can companies really bring accessibility as part of their ethos and like to the center of what they do? I think there is a lot of room for growth in organizations in that matter. Love to hear what you think.
Yeah, I mean, if it's a great question. I mean, if you're sitting there and you're going, accessibility, what's that? Or you're going, I don't, you know, is my stuff accessible? My document, my website, my video. If you're sitting there going, I don't know if it's accessible, it's not. All right, there's no gray here. So the first thing to do is to, again, get educated. We've chucked actually our education pack online, aka.ms/accessibility fundamentals. Go take the badge, go and get yourself educated. And then really, really, really simple things that you can do. If you are writing a document in Office, what we've tried to do is make it so that it's literally one button to check if your document's accessible. It's right next to spell check. You can't tell me you can't find it. It's right there. Hit the button, accessibility checker, and follow the instructions. And you'll find it's very simple things that render something accessible. If you've got a picture in your document, who doesn't send pictures in your next email, your PowerPoint, whatever it is? Add alternative text, which is descriptions behind that image to make it accessible to blind, low vision, and others that need descriptions. Otherwise, that picture will be accessible to those with sight, but inaccessible, and you'll be excluding those that don't have sight. Who wants to exclude? Stop that. If you're like, how accessible is my website? Just go accessibilityinsights.io, download it, put it on your toolbar, hit the button, and it will tell you how accessible your site is. If it's not accessible, there's some quick instructions on how to make it accessible or connect you with people that can help you with that. These things matter. And if you think about the physical world, right, if you've got a building and you're opening up a new building, a new store, a new shop, you want to make sure that everyone can get in there. So you add a ramp, and you add a ramp because it's not just cool for wheelchairs, but it's cool for strollers. And whether you're carrying a baby or a dog, I don't understand the dog thing, but for those that have them, game on. You add a ramp, and you do that right at the beginning of the architecture and the process. You don't add the ramp at the end. You don't fix it once your building's open. We do that with digital environment, and it's got to stop. Accessibility must be thought of at the beginning of your process. If you don't have captions on your video, I will not watch your video. So will millions of others who are deaf. So will millions of others who want to watch that video while not waking up their partner. So just, it's not just about the cool people with disabilities. It's about being more inclusive and not excluding people. And we've just got to get really over that.
Yeah, 100%. What, if anything, would you ask the people here to question or challenge from the usual understanding of disability?
Challenge your stereotypes. When you see a person with a disability, do you see someone as less capable? If you do, you got bias. We've all got bias. We know that bias exists. Challenge it. Disability doesn't mean less able. Disability doesn't mean less sassy either. So we've really got to challenge those stereotypes and make sure that the next time that you are working with someone with a disability, you challenge it to see them as less able and, in fact, the expert that you need to help you to be more inclusive. The reality is that I'm here. I work with hundreds and thousands of people at Microsoft every day who help to make everything from Xbox to Windows to marketing campaigns accessible. And it's the people with disabilities that inform what we do. People with disabilities are experts. So challenge your bias and help us to make disability just part of the language, mental health part of the language. It's a part of being human.
I love it so much. And I 100% agree. Challenge the assumptions and preconceived bias. Thank you, Jenny. This has been so great. I want to open the floor for audience Q&A. So if Leah, B, and Lisa can come back and join us. And I cannot tell y'all how excited and how privileged I feel to have been able to have these conversations today. Like I said, this is something I've been wanting to do for a few years. So I am extremely happy, and I'm extremely happy to see how many questions have come in, how much of the chat is bubbling up. So let me start with some questions here. So this is from Keisha. How do we ensure equality if we completely remove gender in certain situations? So thinking of job opportunities.
How do we think about them by removing gender? I'm sorry, is that the question?
How do we ensure equality if we completely remove gender?
Well, I think it's not so much that we remove gender. I mean, I really want to make sure I'm clear that I don't like gender neutral, for example, is really about the graying or beiging of gender, right? That's sort of not what we're looking at. The fact that we're all affected by gender constructs, I think really calls for all of us to, first of all, make sure that we're using language that is gender related, and that we're looking and seeing, for example, how are we, how successful are we with different gender identities? I think one of the challenges in what I see most of the time now is we're looking at this in a very binary way. So when we talk about within organizations, for example, what our gender objectives are, they're always sort of representation, for example, and in the binary. So we expect, like by 2030, we want to have, 50-50 representation in management, for example. And most of Gen Z and even most of millennials are just like, I don't even know what 50-50 is. 50-50 assumes that there's a binary, when in fact there isn't a binary. And so I think part of it is it's not about not asking for gender where it's relevant. It probably does mean, though, not asking for gender where we're not looking at equity or equality issues. But when we are, it's important that we're looking at that in a much more nuanced way, that we're looking, for example, who are we getting through our recruiting systems? Who are we hiring? How are we promoting? How are we mentoring? If we're looking at all that on that side of the, the organizational house, then we want to be using the more nuanced language, because right now, for the most part, because HR is driving a lot of this for compliance reasons, and EEOC only asks for gender in the binary, that's mostly then, it's sort of the tail wagging the dog, right? So we're using that binary when in fact we have much more richer language for gender, and we should be capturing that. So we understand, for example, what's happening, for folks in many different aspects related to gender. So it's not always the ungendering, but certainly a more nuanced and sophisticated look at gender if we're really trying to address whether or not we're creating equitable and equal environments for folks.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm sorry, just got a message that Jenny had to drop off, unfortunately, but have lots of questions here for the two of you, so we can keep going. Wait, oh, there you are. Leah, you moved in my screen and I was like, wait, did she hop off too? So I have actually a question here for you, Leah V. This is from Mary. Would love to hear Leah V share additional things she would like to hear allies say in advocating for fat and plus sized women. She is so beautiful and strong. I'd love to know what it would be important to hear from others.
Well, thank you for that. We always like a good gassing. Yeah, I mean, I think, so one thing I would say is the term, dropping the term flattering. I think there are microaggressions, small things when it comes to fat phobia. They're like the flattering word. It's just like, what the hell does that mean? Like, when I hear flattering, I feel like, oh, you look more skinny. That's when I hear flattering. So I don't really like when people say that to me. So using words like that, like choosing what words we're using to describe said fat, plus size, obese individual, whatever they want to, call themselves, but understanding that we are not monoliths. That whole funny fat friend, that whole sidekick to a skinny woman in a movie, that shit's out the window. We're killing those stereotypes that, I'm just going to wear, muumuus and sit in the corner, eat burgers, like all these things. And they've been said to me still. Okay, this is not like an old thing that people have been saying back in the day. No, they're still getting said. This whole like, okay, fat women can't be active, right? That's a huge one. Like, oh my God, you exercise? Oh my, like this whole shocking, because you stereotyped me already because you saw my body. So we need to get out of our own biases and stereotypes and what fat individuals can and cannot do. And I think the other speaker was saying it too about asking questions about people's abilities, right? And stop assuming that you know what I can and cannot do because I'm a fat person, a fat human being. Also, like, again, I'm going to reiterate this, sticking up for your fat friends. When someone makes a fat-phobic comment, a body shaming comment, you immediately jump down their throat. I don't care if it's your grandma, your auntie, your man, I don't care who it is. We allow people to say things and we're just like, oh, well, they're old, or oh, they don't know, or oh, that's not an excuse anymore. So when someone says something crazy about someone else's body, whether you see it or there's to you, check them immediately, embarrass them immediately. And I bet you that they will curb that fat phobia real quick?
Love that. Oh my God, there's so many questions coming in. Lisa, you mentioned that we've constricted ourselves to fit in standards of what gender is supposed to be like. Gender clothing, professions, and emotions. How can we do better in not gendering, especially when we're talking about emotions, when speaking with loved ones who may be tied to outdated ideas?
Yeah, I mean, what a great question. I think anytime that we can even just help people identify that we've gendered something that has no inherent gender, we just applied it, is really helpful, because most of the time we don't see it. And when people do, they'll say, well, yes, of course. I mean, relationships should be available to all. Everybody should be able to express when they feel sadness or joy, or, it's a human experience. Every emotion ought to be accessible and available to each of us. And I think that in so many ways, because we constrict ourselves before we even realize, I mean, I was talking to I'll try to do this as a really quick story, but I was talking to a CEO and we began this conversation, and I asked him to tell me a little bit about his gender story. And he says, I don't have a gender story. And I said, well, we all have one, so let's figure out. And I asked him I said, what's the first memory that you have of where gender was introduced to you, whether it's because of something you got to do or something you didn't get to do? And that began, like, immediately. He was there. He was 7 or 8 years old. He loved to cook. He was in the kitchen with his mom and his aunties at the holiday. And he was told at that point, after years of being able to get in there and help, and he created his own recipes and all this stuff, that he couldn't be there because he was supposed to be out there with the boys and the men, and they were playing sports or they were doing whatever. And he realized in that moment, he said, I didn't just give up cooking in my vision for being a chef someday. I really, my joy for food really got limited. And I eat functionally. And from there, we could go through his life and look at a lot of things that were decided for him or that he decided related to gender. And at the end of all of that, he said, I have a lot of privilege. A lot of things have gone well for me. But he said, but until this conversation, I thought I had made all those decisions myself. And now I realized that most of the human sort of experience wasn't even on the plate. And that's where I started. And then I further made choices within that because of what was expected and what he expected of himself. And I think that that's true for a lot of us when we stand back and we say, what's the effect of this gendering of the most everyday aspects of life and how we react to that. It's a challenge for all of us to then get beyond those obstacles and realize that, there really wasn't an inherent gendering of that. We just have all sort of constructed it and agreed to it, and it's a harmful construct. So it's time to let it go.
Lisa, I'm going to do another question for you, because I actually think this has come in a couple of times in different variations.
Okay.
I get very in my head about using the right pronouns with my non-binary friends. So to the point where I fumble their preferred pronouns sometimes. What's the best way to handle misgendering someone?
Yeah, great question. And I do want to say one thing first about the preferred pronouns. And I would just say, if you can let go of the preferred part and just say pronouns, that would be great too. Because we only started saying preferred pronouns when people, gender diverse folks of one sort or another, started having them. Before that, people just had the pronouns. So we just get to let everybody have the pronouns. Pronouns are the hardest thing. We actually know, because they're repeated even more than people's names, that when somebody changes their name and pronouns, people have an easier time with the name than the pronouns. So one thing is to just practice. I mean, that's one of the things I'll do. I'll actually practice on my own just to make sure your O is pairing. So you're creating a new pathway associating that person with that. But if you end up misgendering somebody, just say, oh, I'm sorry, and move on. I'll do better next time. And that's it. Because I think what happens is that person understands that you're getting used to something new. Your heart and, your heart's intention is always clear. And if somebody knows that you're really trying, they're not upset about it. It's only when you're over apologizing. A lot of what Jenny was talking about around some of the disability stuff, where instead of just sort of saying it, taking responsibility and moving on, which is what the person who was misgendered is hoping for. It just kind of goes on, and then they end up trying to take care of you. It's if it happens, and it will happen, just know they're not really upset about it unless it's a repeated thing and they think you're doing it intentionally. But since that's not what most people are doing, they're right there with you. They're not going to be upset, and just own it and move on. But it is uncomfortable, and I understand that, but it's going to happen, and just getting better each time is important.
Learning, right?
Yeah.
This is a question for both of you. How do we improve if she can see it, she can be it, when most of the images in movies, TV, ads, influencers are young, white, skinny, abled women? And boys and men of all ages and sizes are accepted. For example, there are almost no casting calls for women over 50, and when there are, they are stereotypically senior citizens. Casting calls ask for certain body types and standard clothing sizes.
I'll let Leah, if you start that out.
This is like a whole, it is, I like to say that this is so exhausting that this is even a thing. Because I was on set recently, and the amount, just let's talk about the age thing. Let's not even talk about color, culture, body type, just age. They have the ages are people think I'm mid-20s, but I'm actually 33. People always oh my God, I know you in your 30s. I thought you were younger. And so a lot of the models are 24, 25, 22. And the demographic for these plus size retailers are women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, but they will not use those women as models. They use the younger models, right? And it happens on every set. I can tell you that I've actually been on one set. I think it was Universal Standard, where I was modeling with a touchy 50 model. And I've modeled a lot. I'm usually the oldest one on set. So that says a lot as a 33-year-old. And so it is outrageous. It is something that we have been screaming about, whether it's in the modeling industry, whether it's the acting industry. They always seem to give crumbs. Okay, we have a sort of curvy person, she's in betweeny, she's a 10 with a little bit of so that's good enough for you fatties. You actually be happy we have a kind of curvy girl as a lead. And it's okay, so this is a slap in the face, because this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about complete and full body inclusivity on all, whether it's a beauty campaign, whether it's accessories, because even accessories, who's the model? A thin white woman. I want to see an ankle bracelet on a dark-skinned chick with a fat-ass cankle. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see how it's going to look on a skinny white woman. So it's just little stuff like that where you don't notice. Hair commercials, makeup, it's on and on and on. And I don't know, other than we as the people, we were talking about mobilizing. We have to mobilize and make and ask these companies and put them at a standard. No, I'm sorry, this size 10, this in-betweenie who barely has some rumps and lumps, she's great, love her, she's beautiful, but we want more than that. We have to stop accepting crumbs. That's what it's come down to. We have to go on these social media pages, email these CEOs, email these marketing directors who are all thin white people for the most part, 99%, and tell them, no, great, not acceptable. That's it.
Well, it's hard to add anything to that, so I'm not going to. What I think I will do, Leah, I love you. I think that the one thing I do want to say about that is that, on a completely different track, is what is it that we see that we think we want to be? Because I think when we're really talking, oftentimes, for example, to girls and to women, but it's true also for everybody else, but is what's their authentic life that they're trying to create? Because mostly what we're doing is we're taking sort of power and money as the values that we assume are what everybody wants. And that's not true for a lot of people. And so I think the first thing is really trying to say, instead of taking these outdated notions of what has real value, when we know, in fact, that what has real value, after you can have a safe roof over your head and you have food, and you have heat, and you have all the things that matter for safety and all that. What matters is relationships. What matters is my ability to express and be my authentic self, to see myself valued in other people and in relationship. Think about the values of what we really care about, and not just sort of take these societal, ideas of what has value, which are very typically masculine focused values, and say, wait a minute, what do we really care about? What do we want? What is this society we're trying to create? And we're talking in some ways, whether it's Leah V and Jenny or what I'm talking about, is we're really just talking about the human experience, and not in that kind of special way. We're just talking about all of this richness is what makes us interesting and exciting and connecting to that and being learners and just discovering, as a lifelong process. That's the richness, right? And the relationship and intimacy and learning about one another. I think that's the thing. So that whole idea of see it, be it is these notions of like, oh, success is this, ladder that we're all walking up and that we're trying to figure out. And if you have to step on somebody on the way, well, then that's okay. No, it's not. And that just hollows us out. So I think Leah V said it beautifully in the way of probably the real question that was being asked. But I think the other aspect of it is we've got to start asking folks, what is it that we really want? What is that authentic life that's worth living? And what does this really mean to have this life that is a meaningful life? So I think that's just what I would add to what Leah V said.
I could not have asked to end this panel in a better note. I would just love to stay here and chat with y'all for like a few more hours. Leah V, you're in New York, so I will be calling you for coffee soon. And thanks everyone for joining us for the first of what will be a jam-packed week of sessions and discussions. I really think this was the right way to set the tone, to start with the energy, the challenging of preconceived notions that we need to really just put away. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone for joining. And I'll pass it over to Joanna, who has all the closing info you need.
Thanks, Maricella. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Maricella. And thank you, Lisa, Leah V, and Jenny, so much for being here today. That was such an amazing discussion and a really great way, like Maricella said, to start this week off. Thank you all so much for joining us today as well, and for engaging so much in the chat. I loved seeing all of those quotes coming in and all the questions. Thanks so much for being here. If this conversation got you thinking a bit about what needs to change in the world, in your lives, personally or professionally, the best way to really process all of that, everything that we just covered, and really make a plan of action is to attend one of our roundtables this Thursday afternoon or Friday morning. I'm gonna pop a link into the chat so that you can see all of our upcoming roundtables, because through really prioritizing and initiating conversations like the one we just had and processing through it all with our peers, we can really share ideas on how to rebuild the equitable world that we deserve. So I really hope that we see you at some of those roundtables this week. Remember, throughout the week, we're hosting at least one feature session a day, like today's, so mark your calendars. Invite your friends to attend. We always want to make more friends here too. And let us know your favorite parts on social media using the hashtag Mobilize Women. Special thanks as well to our Mobilize Women Week sponsors, RBC Wealth Management, Accenture, Guardian Life, Verizon, Bunge, BakerHostetler, Diageo, Lincoln Financial Network, Robinson+Cole, Amalgamated Bank, Key for Women, Cornell MBA, Encourage Coaching, National Grid, Lannick, and Mutual of Omaha. We really appreciate your support this year. Our next session is this afternoon at 2 p.m. It's Building Psychological Safety and Belonging, featuring another group of incredible speakers. We have Elizabeth Nieto, Global Head of Equity and Impact at Spotify, Erin Thompson, Head of Diversity, Inclusion, Belonging, and Access at Upwork, Gabriella Rosen-Kellerman, MD, Chief Product Officer at BetterUp, Daisy Algar Dominguez, Chief People Officer at Vice Media Group, and their moderator, Shireen Luz, Senior Director, USWM Human Resources at RBC Wealth Management. I'm going to be at that session, so I hope to see you all there in the chat. Say hi to me if you will be there too. And thanks again for being here. So long, everyone.